in the Bible. Proverbs 6, verse 6. Go to the ant, you sluggard. There you go, you spotted it. Sorry, now I'm in. I didn't really mean to interrupt the flow, but isn't it a great word? Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. And then Matthew 6. Look at the birds, free and unfettered, not tied down to a job description, careless in the care of God, and you count far more to him than birds. If God gives such attention to the appearance Shall I try again? Is there something we should be doing? Thank you. If God gives such attention to the appearance of wild flowers, most of which are never even seen, don't you think he'll attend to you, take pride in you, do his best for you? What I'm trying to do here is to get you to relax, to not be so preoccupied with getting, so you can respond to God's giving.
Morning. Thank you. This is a poem called Cat and the Hearth by D.H. Lawrence. You must promise not to tell Katrina, my daughter, that I'm reading this. I have to keep up the appearance of indifference towards cats. We've got 2 in the house, and I still don't know how that happened. All that matters is to be at one with you, the living God, to be a creature in your house, O God of life, like a cat asleep on a chair, at peace, in peace, at home in the house of the living, sleeping on the hearth and yawning before the fire, sleeping on the hearth of the living world, yawning at home before the fire of life, feeling the presence of you, the living God, like a great reassurance, a deep calm in the heart, a presence as of a master, a mistress, sitting on the board in their own and greater being in the house of life. So we're in the B series. I don't know who's in the A series. We're wanting to address the onward rush and drivenness that comes from maybe overemphasizing sometimes, doing over being. There's a science and nature book review that I read recently, which has echoes of Rupert's introduction to this series, and I'm just going to read a little bit from that. It says, the book, The Hidden Life of Trees, argued that trees are social insensate. The Power of Trees, its sequel, which is this review, shows that they can be our saviors, but it's terribly hard to let ourselves be saved. We think we can be the authors of our salvation. We are doers by constitution. Of course, there are things that we could and should be doing, but in terms of forestry practice, often what's billed as part of the solution is part of the problem. Roger Willemben, the author, brilliantly and readably shows us how urgent and how hard it is to do nothing. Now, the series suggestion has been that to focus on being allows the rightful doing to emerge from our truest selves, a centered and rooted place, perhaps. And this seems good. The God of Israel called himself I Am in the story of Exodus. And And we read that good theology suggests we start with God. We get our cue from God, and we get our energy, our juice from God. We're to consider how to live in light of God. So how might we then enjoy a good marriage between doing and being? Can it be simpler, more together, more healthy? What cues do we have? Now, there's a theme of literature in the Bible called the wisdom material, and it's typically couched in poetic, non-linear form, as opposed to the linear, more argument and logic form that we're more used to. This morning we're going to go into the territory of the Old Testament books, which comprise of Ecclesiastes, Job, Song of Songs, some of Psalms, and Proverbs. And we're also going to look at some of the wisdom sayings of Jesus. The wisdom material invites us to pay attention both to the world around us, nature, and also to the world within us. It's our thoughts, our emotions, and our bodily responses. We talked about be holy, be still, be faithful. Now it's be wise. And I can't remember for the life of me why we chose this subject. It's kind of lost in the har that's descended Newington last week. And it seemed as today has approached less and less wise to do this particular talk. My youngest son is just finishing off university. His biggest piece of work in his last year has been his dissertation, and he texted Kirsty to say he got it in, which was a great relief. And I texted him. I said, I've been thinking about you, and I've been thinking about Lord of the Rings. There's a scene you may remember. See Becky smiling. This is good. There's a scene where the fellowship are at the foot of the Mines of Moria. They're trying to get into this big mountain, and they can't, they're struggling. And behind them, there's this lake. And suddenly what erupts from this lake is this monster, this octopus-like monster with tentacles, arms and legs flashing around like nobody's business, and they have to then start hacking away at these limbs to protect themselves. And I said to him, is this a bit like what it's been like writing a dissertation? Is that a bit dramatic? And he texted back and saying, actually, no, it's exactly what it's been like for the last 24 hours, as it has been for this week, for me. Which actually is quite apt. The idea of starting again is quite apt for this material. So I want to start off with just talking about two particular things to do with wisdom first. The first is, conversely, that to be wise, we're instructed to let go of being wise. Let it go. Let go of what you have. I guess it's about creating space. Admit you don't know. Be humble, be nimble. Start again. In fact, letting go in a number of people's minds is the spiritual task. The second introductory point is that metaphor is the primary vehicle of the wisdom writings. A metaphor is a bridge connecting two things along which we're invited to travel back and forth, making connections being often between the outer world, that's what's seen, and the inner world, which is not seen, what's unseen. It often starts with nature and ends with an invitation to a new way of being and doing. Can I have the second slide, please, Joe? I'm sorry, Joe, can I have slide 3? I've put the numbers in wrong. That's the advantage of having a maths degree, isn't it? Numbers are a bit tricky. In short, the wisdom material is the Bible's very earthy interface with the world. Its themes are listening and looking, especially at nature. It's the everyday and the ordinary. And we're going to be primarily using the Message Bible translation for this very point, to emphasize the everyday nature of the topic. Wisdom material is also very keen on the here and now and being provocative. You'll see the words paths and ways appear quite often, which I guess are the direction our being takes us. It all smacks of being grounded, being at home in God's world. Example of these elements are found in the poem I read at the start. Nature, a cat, a fireplace, a home, the greater being or presence of the master and mistress. Their being envelops or creates that environment. So let's look at an example from the Old Testament books of wisdom first. A proverb, an amusing one. It certainly amused a flatmate of mine when I was a student. He loved this. And it appears that it's often meant to be amusing, a number of proverbs. And proverbs are also meant to stand alone, and they're almost contextless. So what might wisdom or be wise have to say about the doing dialogue? Right, Joel, it's now slide 2. Oh, thank you. Right, well done. Here we are. Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider his ways and be wise. Or it has as it is in the message, you lazy fool, look at an ant, watch it closely, let it teach you a thing or two. Nobody has told it what to do. All summer it stores up food. At harvest it stockpiles provision. So here we've got human behaviour, laziness, compared to the industry of and personal responsibility taken by the ant. So the metaphor is around the ant. In hermeneutics, in biblical interpretation, we sometimes read about 3 worlds. There's a world behind the text, which is historical context. There's a world of the text, which is the content, the words. But then there's a third world, which is a world in front of the text, which is you and me. And here we've got the interplay between our outer world, the text, the words on the page, and our inner world, what we've imagined, what we've felt and thought in our heads and our bodies. And so we're encouraged when we read or meditate on the Bible to pay attention here to this interplay, to our responses as a window into our world where the Word of God is to land and make a home. What am I invited by the Spirit of God to notice? And is there anything I need to welcome as an agent for change? To drill down a bit more, what words or what sense am I hearing, which has elicited some emotional or physical response in me, positively or negatively, where we try not to filter? And or what memories are recalled, and or what stories that we're telling ourselves have come to the fore. In short, what am I noticing, and is there a direction of travel that I'm being offered? And this is right in the ballpark of the wisdom material, which is trying to provoke a response. In this case, to go to the ant, you sluggard. Kirsty's going to reflect on this poem first, and then I'm going to do the same, and we're going to see if ultimately there are any reflections on being and doing.
Okay, so this is probably a slightly random collection of thoughts. Hopefully they make some sense. Starting with a quote from somebody called Mechthild of Magdeburg. There's a Belgian lady who lived in the 13th century. I should say Andrew found this quote, I didn't. Who was a Beguine, which was a spirit-led lay female movement from the 13th century. That sounds very intriguing. So she wrote, "Each creature made must live in its own true nature. How could I resist my nature that lives for oneness with God?" I feel that sort of captures a lot of what we're trying to say. So just to start with, I was reflecting on what the subject as a whole. We all have different relationships with those words doing and being. And maybe depending on our personality type. And I just wanted to say a little bit about personality. Many years ago, Andrew and I came across a personality type called the Enneagram. Now, you may hate personality types, that's fine. I'm not trying to push that. I quite enjoy them. They have some use, some limited use, I think. But we discovered this one many years ago, and we found it very helpful. Very imaginatively names the personality types. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And Andrew's a 1, and I am a 9. They're completely opposite. Although actually Enneagram puts them in a little circle, so they do sort of come round to be next to each other. So 1 is a perfectionist who's very, very proactive, very quite driven. If you say a task needs done, the 1 is doing it before they finish speaking. They've got on with it. They are very, they're a bit angry with the world. They're angry that the world is not perfect, angry with themselves and you, that you're not perfect. But they're very, they're very active. But it can be quite driven from a fear of criticism and what people are going to think and say. As well. I'm a 9, which is kind of the opposite, like if you very kind of, nicely called a peacemaker, but it's very, why stand up when you can sit down? Why sit down if you could lie down? Kind of, if when I get given a task, I have to reflect on it for a week before I do it, which is very annoying to the team sometimes. Rupert will comment. Have you made that email? I'm thinking about writing that email. Thinking about how I will write that email. So being is a much more natural place, I think, for a 9 characteristic 9 than doing. But the being actually isn't always as peaceful as it looks like. It can be filled with anxiety, and the non-doing can be from a place of fear of not being up to it, not managing, not being enough. And I think sometimes we approach this subject and we quote these proverbs from those different standpoints, and both need to come to a place of peace and presence and understanding of who they are. And I think this is what these proverbs and sayings can offer us. So reflecting, I was going to say another thing about Andrew thinking, I think you can measure life by productivity, can't you? And I think he learned that from a time of illness where he couldn't do anything, he really literally couldn't read or watch television, or, there was nothing he could do. He was living long post-viral chronic fatigue. And he learned that he measured his worth by productivity. And God is asking him to change his understanding of himself, because if in a day where you could do nothing, you are still worth something to God. So that I think that's quite a key thing. And anyway, I could go on about the personalities because it's very interesting, but I'll move on. So how do we reflect? How do I reflect on this verse? So obviously, in a very straightforward level, I think the guy is saying, ants store things up and prepare. That's probably a good thing to do. But I think we're permitted to sink deeper and meditate and get into the and sit with that more imaginatively with the. I'm not saying it doesn't mean that. I think it does mean that, but I think we're invited to at times just sit within the sayings and scriptures. And now I believe there's it's called midrash. Now this isn't an allergy or a illness. It's a way of meditating on scripture, which is probably the way a lot of people would have come to this Bible in originally, in kind of in the Jewish Bible, and we've created a very sort of heady, cognitive way of approaching scripture. But actually, it was quite originally meant to sink into the ideas. So I'm allowing myself permission to sink in beyond that simple understanding of the scripture. So when I look at an ant, I have some understanding of biology a little bit, and I'm aware that an ant is not cognitively able to plan for the future. An ant doesn't actually know that something is going to happen or in the future. It doesn't know that winter's coming. It is just doing what it instinctively does, which is extraordinary, really, what it does. And they have an amazing, complex social... Read about ants, it's very interesting. The ant doesn't have a work ethic. Her doing isn't wrapped up in shoulds and oughts and nots. It's not wrapped up in worth. He's doing what his instincts instruct him to. Her doing is not motivated by a fear of the future, nor is it hindered by questions, am I going to make it or am I enough? Am I going to be able to pull this twig 6 times my size? It just does it. Poetry, so I'm going to write a quote about poetry, and I think when we see poetry we could think about wisdom here. It's by a guy called Roger Houston, who's written a lot of books on 10 poems to give you courage, 10 poems to do this, that, and they're great books, actually. Just if you enjoy poetry, it's really helpful. So poetry calls us to pay attention to both the world around us and to the world within. When I pay attention, something in me wakes up, and that something is much closer to who I am than the driven or drifting self I usually take myself to be. I am straightened somehow, sure, and brought into life. And I think this is what these proverbs and sayings, as we sink into them, help us. And I think particularly important were the words driven or drifting. So I think both Andrew and I, in our ways of reacting to these doing and being words, both have a problem. And we are either driven into activity through lack, or we're drifting, maybe what I can do, by fear of not quite managing or being up to it. So what I'm receiving from observing nature, from both the flowers that don't do anything, from the ant that's just busy about doing what it instinctively is doing, is an invitation to center myself in the intrinsic worth that I'm given as a being. Not to be frozen by fear of incompetence or insufficiency, not to act out of fear of what may happen, a fear of criticism or correction, but to allow myself to be aware of what God draws me into, to be aware, and I love this question that we've been doing, to be aware of when I feel God's pleasure. I'm not just a person who sits around doing nothing. I do love doing, and I do feel his pleasure when I'm active and doing. And yeah. So but also when I'm not doing. Yeah. It's harder for us because we're not ants. It's probably a good thing. I love Burns's poem to a mouse. You know, we sleek it curin timorous beastie, what a panic's in thy breastie. It's an amusing poem, but if you know the premise, the man is ploughing, poet is ploughing, and he knocks over a mouse's nest, and the mouse is quite cross. And you can see it's panic. But as he goes on in the poem, it's quite a sort of darkish end where he reflects that the mouse is better off. The mouse has just lost his home, but the mouse is better off than he is, because the mouse doesn't look into the future and fear. The mouse doesn't look in the past with worry about what happened or dread or embarrassment or concern. The mouse doesn't do that, but people do. It's a gift, but it's also really hard to manage, and it's what makes us different. But I think the invitation here is that we can So we need help, the help that the ant and the mouse doesn't need. And I think this is what the Bible maybe sometimes takes us to. Stay a little bit with the ant and the, well, it doesn't say mice, but birds or flowers. We think and worry over the future and past, and we have to find ways of creatively, of using that gift of looking in the future and the past creatively, and not let it drive us or disturb us. So if we can enter our worth as created beings, not questioning who we are, but accepting who we are as accepted and important and worth, we can enter into our doing and our being with greater courage.
I think I was promised a button to press or a cable to pull if Kirsty said anything I wasn't happy with, and I didn't get that button, and I didn't get that cable. So, I don't know. Go to the ant, you sluggard. So, responses. Kirsty's response, mine. Now, straight away it's got my back up. I'm bristling, having chosen to talk about be wise and turn to the Proverbs, and I recall that I don't actually like the Proverbs. I get annoyed by how pointed they can be. Here we go again. The words go and sluggard irritate me. They seem arrogant, assured, having no nuance or bend. It's in my face. I'm being admonished, commanded in a very sweeping fashion, and I'm getting defensive and keyed up. It's pushing me in the direction of doing. And B, I'm hearing echoes of a terrible word, an awful word. More. Another part of me is thinking, I'm okay. I take some pride in getting some things done. Carrying loads, being relatively efficient like an ant. But that story is cracking. Whether it's because I feel the load is beyond me, or because I just don't see carrying as such a great target or a reason to be. Is this what it's all about? Production, generation, productivity. It's a story that's increasingly lost its appeal for me. My intuition is that this proverb is going in the wrong direction for me. The prophetic, prayerful, and spiritual development traffic has got me going in the other direction. That's towards considering stop, do nothing, and the question, is this enough for God? And then what I recall is Robert Bly's poem, Things to Think, and I'm just going to read one stanza from that. Some of it's quite wild, but this stanza is maybe acceptable publicly. When someone knocks on the door, think that he's about to give you something large, tell you you're forgiven, or that it's not necessary to work all the time, or that it's been decided that if you lie down, no one will die. So this is what I've been noticing, and the direction of travel that is offered is back. It's remembering that noticing and engaging healthily with this doing, this pushing tomorrow thing has been and is important for how I turn up in the world and before God. The proverb has been provocative, but it's also been useful in reminding me that my leaning is often towards frenetic doing. As well as being defensive and keyed up, I belittle the source. This doesn't sound like sound advice. An ant, really? Really? Then I remember Jesus, the rabbi, the teacher of wisdom, often about the kingdom of heaven, saying, it's here, it's now, and it's within you. The metaphorical theologian, as he's sometimes called, with his parables about seed and weeds and pearls, and his I am sayings. I am bread, I am light, I am vine. And his object lessons. Look at the fig tree, and the birds, and the wildflowers, and oh heck, we're now in Matthew 6, of course. So Joel, slide 4, please. Jesus, wisdom teacher in the mold of Old Testament wisdom, comes in Matthew 6 to address role-playing. And I'm transported back to a friend's story who, on just having retired, finds he implodes. He suddenly no longer has to play the part of a salesman, a promoter, an extrovert for his company. And the dissonance between his being and his doing is being played out in his mind and his body. He recovered and it was fine. But here in Matthew 6, Jesus turns to role-playing in the world. So it's performance giving before men and role-playing before God, babbling in prayer. He starts with nature. Look at the birds and the wildflowers. These are our metaphors. Here's our bridge for getting us from or to another place of being. What do you notice within you as compared to what you see and observe in nature, the birds and the wildflowers? I'll tell you, says Jesus. Verse 26, look at the birds, free and unfettered, not tied down to a job description, careless in the care of God, and you count far more than birds. Verse 30, if God gives such attention to the appearance of wildflowers, most of which are never even seen, don't you think he'll attend to you, take pride in you, do his best for you? And in verse 31, what I'm trying to do here is to get you to relax, to not be so preoccupied with getting so you can respond to God's giving. And now we're going somewhere for me. God is a giver, has already given me and you a home, a place in which to be and from which to do. Make your home in me as I make my home in you, he says in John 15. One writer, interestingly, John Marion, puts it this way: the kingdom of heaven is not so much a place to go to, but a place you come from. It's a whole new world. It's a whole new way of looking at the world. For me, I accept and I'm reconciled to being an ant in many ways, but I'm also reminded that at some deep level, I am drawn towards being a cat, to be at one and at home with the living God. Again, not a word to Katrina, please. Okay, Kirsty, do you want to take this next bit? We're going to give everyone a chance to, for yourself, spend time and have a look at your own responses and be with your own God.
So we're just going to take 5 minutes to offer you a chance to reflect on these sayings and to allow them to sort of sink into you and allow yourself to notice what happens to you when you hear these sayings, what God might be inviting you into. So what words or sense am I hearing which may elicit emotional, physical response, positively or negatively? Don't try to, sometimes we have, like Andy did, immediately negative response. That's okay, just sit with that. It might be memories, stories, things coming up for you, what you're noticing, and what direction of travel is being offered. So I'm just going to read out two of the of these, and just you can pick one, a couple of these phrases, and pick one or sit with them. Which one draws your attention? Which one pulls you? And just sit with it. And we'll just bring it to a close in a few minutes. Okay, you lazy fool, look at an ant. So maybe just sit quietly. If you want to close your eyes, sit in a relaxed position and just receive the words. You lazy fool, look at an ant. Watch it closely. Let it teach you a thing or two. Nobody has to tell it what to do. All summer it stores up food. At harvest it stockpiles provisions. Look at the birds, free and unfettered, not tied down to a job description, careless in the care of God. You count far more to him than birds. God gives such attention to the appearance of flowers, most of which never are seen. Don't you think he'll attend to you, take pride in you, do his best for you? What I'm trying to do here is to get you relaxed, not to be so preoccupied with getting, so you can respond to God's giving. Let's sit with these for a few minutes.
Just to finish, if you can draw your reflections to a close, I can read a short poem by Mary Oliver, which many of you will know. And this is probably one of the most concise statements about being on the earth, being and doing that I've ever come across. Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches and they call again. It's simple, they say, and you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. So in conclusion, just as a summary, the wisdom writings in the Bible suggest we pay attention to the world around us and to the world inside us. To be wise, I'm suggesting, is to be grounded. Let's respect the outer world and its gifts, the everyday, the here and now. Let's just simply look and listen. Be at home. In your home, i.e. in your family dynamics, in your location, mine is Newington, in your skin, allow and make your peace. Make your home with the master, the mistress of your house, your life. For you, after all, are the dwelling place of God. And finally, be kingdom of heavenly minded. It's the place you come from. Paul.